Welcome to Stageworthy. I'm Phil Rickaby, the host of this podcast. This is episode 324. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, May 24th, or during the week until May 27th, make sure you check out the Stageworthy Instagram for a chance to win tickets to one of my favorite theatre companies in Toronto, Eldritch Theatre, and their new show, Two Weird Tales. I don't want to say too much. I'm really excited for this show, and I really want you to see it too. Stageworthy is a one-person operation, so not only do I arrange the guests, I also edit the show, I promote it, and I also created the music that you can hear under what I'm saying now. I also shoulder all of the financial responsibilities for keeping the show going, so if you enjoy the podcast, please consider supporting it. There are a few ways that you can do that. If you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those ratings and reviews help new people to find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And you can also leave a tip for the show by dropping some change in the virtual tip jar. I will put a link to that in the show notes, which you can find on the website or in your podcast app. But one of the most important things that you can do, even more important than ratings, reviews, or even financial support, is to share on social media. Even a retweet helps. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the archive of all 324 episodes at stageworthypodcast.com. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. My guest this week is Santiago Guzmán. Santiago is a writer, performer, director, and producer for theatre based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. He is also the artistic director of TODOS Productions, an organization that seeks to promote, produce, and support work of underrepresented artists in Newfoundland and Labrador. Here's our conversation. So you're in St. John's, Newfoundland right now?
That's correct. Wow. Yeah, this is home.
Are you still winter there?
I mean, I was very hopeful yesterday where the weather was absolutely gorgeous. I was like, I think I walked around the city just wearing a vest and, my Blundstones, and it was great. And today it started snowing again. So I was like, okay, spring is not around the corner as I thought it would be.
That sounds like a Canadian spring/winter to me.
Yeah.
What is it? We call it false spring, the spring of our discontent, the fool's spring. There's all kinds of levels of spring before we actually get to the real thing. I mean, as somebody who grew up in Mexico, what's your winter experience been?
Well, I mean, it has been, for the past 6 years, I have spent Christmas here in Canada. So like that, I feel like I guess I hold on to these like memories of like, oh, you remember that time with the posada and piñata, and, like all of these like traditional Mexican things that I grew up doing, or eating, or anyway, so I think that Christmas time or like the holidays, winter really in Mexico has always been cold. Well, that's what I thought. When I was in Mexico, I really thought that those Christmases were very cold. Like we would wear our thickest jackets. And then when I moved here, I was like, okay, yeah, that's not it. Yeah. So, but yeah, anyway, it has been an adjustment. I feel like. Obviously, the snow, like you have to talk about the snow if you're talking to an immigrant.
Of course.
I think they're very, very different feelings about it. I love seeing it snow, like, but I don't love being outside in the snow. If that makes any sense. So I feel like, especially, from all the places that I could have moved, I moved to Newfoundland and Labrador, which is, one of the coldest provinces in the country. But I don't regret it. And I guess it's just because the people here are really, really warm. So they keep me warm here.
You are not you are not alone in the idea of it's really nice to look at this snow. It's best from indoors, unless you're one of those strange people who really enjoys winter sports. But
Like I feel like I usually don't practice any like winter outdoors anything just because I guess I didn't grow up doing them or practicing them, so I had zero interest. But it's usually my friends that are like either local or that are so into it that I just let myself try those things and see what happens. And sometimes I do enjoy them. So anyway, that's interesting.
That's good. I mean, it's good to try them. It's good to try them. My problem with most of them is that I don't enjoy the cold. And so you kind of have to enjoy a face full of snow now and then for a lot of the winter sports. And I just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I when I am like out in the cold and I feel like my face freeze and I feel like sometimes I say, oh, this is what having Botox feels like. And I'm like, maybe I should consider, but then I'm like, no, Santiago, you're just cold. It's
just cold.
It's just cold.
As a writer and performer and director, is that something that you did in Mexico? What is the story of deciding to move from Mexico to Newfoundland?
Well, I moved here 7 years ago because I wanted to pursue an acting career. I thought that was just like the case in Mexico where, like the arts were just thought as these like careers that people would do for a hobby or, like that there was not a lot of like seriousness around it. That's what I thought when I was in Mexico. So I was actually going to pursue a career in communications in Mexico because I was so afraid of, all of these things that people always say about like, how are you going to live from theater? How are you going to do this? How are you going to build a family and blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to pursue communications while also pursuing acting because I thought that I would have like a backup plan. And I say that in quotation marks, obviously. But then I went to, I already had my life planned. I had everything set up for me to stay in Mexico and get my communications degree and all of these things. And then I went to the open house at the university where I asked, so, like I'm so passionate about theater. Is there a way that your degree would, intersect with theater? And the one of the teachers there looked at me and said, Santiago, this is a business school. We are here to do business. If you want to pursue theater, go to London, go to New York, go somewhere else, but not here. And then that moment, I was like, at first I was distraught because I had my life planned out. And then that was an opportunity for me. I think that my dad, who, fun fact, he's an industrial chemical engineer. So when I told him that I wanted to pursue the arts, he almost, wanted me to take his last name out of my name. But then, he actually got to understand my passion and that I was actually not that bad at it. So he was very supportive. He has always been. I'm really grateful for that. And so he said to me, well, why don't you actually listen to this person and find something else? Now, my dad never thought that I would move to Newfoundland and Labrador. He thought, that I would maybe stay in Mexico or move to Mexico City or to a bigger city, Guadalajara, Monterrey, I don't know. And but then it just happened. I started looking at universities elsewhere outside of Mexico, just, dreaming, because again, moving to another country was always like a dream, but something that is like so far away from actually happening. At least that's what I thought. And then I was considering moving to Ontario, to Toronto specifically, and pursue a career there. And then, I looked at the tuition there and I was like, okay, yeah, this is not going to happen. And my dad said to me, Santiago, I love you and I want to support you, but we cannot afford this. I was like, you know what? Fair enough. That's okay. And I was like, well, that's it. No, I'm definitely staying in Mexico. When then I went to a college fair in Mexico City, where all of these universities from across the country had a little booth. And there was only one. The university here at Newfoundland and Labrador had the only university in this province, had a BFA in acting. And I was like, okay. And the other universities were offering like theater, like workshops or summer, camps or whatever. But I really wanted to look for like a BFA at the time because first of all, because I didn't understand the difference between the college and the university format. And I just thought that the university format would also make my parents feel comfortable and, feel that I was actually pursuing a career. And yeah, so I applied to the university. Also, Phil, if I'm being completely honest, I was really afraid of rejection. I was really afraid of dealing with being rejected. I did consider applying to the National Theatre School in Mexico City, but I felt that I didn't want to deal with that rejection. There was always, I guess it happens to all of us, that we have a little voice in our head saying you're not good enough, you're not worth it. And that I didn't want to deal with that. And so the way that worked out for me to apply to come here, I only had to do a self-tape. And at the time, like that's 7 years ago where oh my God, it was it was a show in itself. But like doing a self-tape 7 years ago was completely different. But I thought to myself, well, if I only have to do a self-tape and I don't know them, they don't know me, if I get rejected, it will be easier for me to deal with that rejection. For some reason, I thought that would be the case. And well, lucky for me, because I didn't have any like plan B or anything, I only applied to this university and I got in. Now, it wasn't until I was in my second year of university that it actually clicked. I was like, Santiago, what have you done? What did you do? Because I have, when I was in Mexico, I've mainly focused on acting. That was my priority, and that was the thing that I was excited about. I had directed like one play, but I was really, really drawn to acting. And at the time, I was obviously, I thought I was bilingual. And by what I mean was that I was able to communicate in English properly and engage in a conversation, but I was not actually bilingual. And it wasn't until I was here that I realized, I was like, Santiago, like, how do you think that you're going to do a career in your second language that it actually requires you to speak? Like, how are you going to do that? Like, and the thing was that to me, the most interesting thing about my career or the degree that I was pursuing at the time was figuring out how to perform in my second language, which was something that nobody taught me how to do, not even my professors. And actually, they didn't know what to do with me because, that is a very different experience when you were not born speaking a language and then you are acting in said language. So I had to develop my own system for it.
Can I ask you, like, so many things I want to ask about. First of all, that teacher who told you that we teach business here, what a favor that person did for you.
I know. And, like the funny thing was that, again, I mean, I say it as though this is not going to go anywhere, but this person, like his son was a dear friend of mine who was a film actor. And I was like, And I thought, I was like, I just don't understand why you're pushing me away. Like if your own son is pursuing a very similar career. Now, I think that his son actually stayed in Mexico, and I think now he's a film director, I think. But anyway, yeah, in the end, I do. And sometimes I wonder if I should just send him a letter and say, thank you so much. Like that was the best thing you could have ever done to me.
Well, because it's interesting, because it immediately told you this is not the place for you. Because there's so many other ways that could have been approached. They could have been, yes, we're going to teach about communication. And yes, we mostly focus on business, but there is a business aspect to what you're doing. And, they could have done that, but no, they didn't. They sort of told you that this was not the place for you.
And it's interesting because, like, to this day, I feel like business is such an important part of what I do.
Mm.
And even like my partner, who is a business person, he is always so impressed by how I carry my business. And he's like, I just don't understand. I thought that you were a theater maker. And I was like, yeah, and a business person. Excuse you. And I think that, like, for instance, that was one of the things that I didn't learn at university, how to deal with the business of theater creation and like filmmaking. And I have come to learn those in my own practice. But yeah, at the same time, I agree. I think that they did me a good one with, letting me go and saying, yeah, this is not the right place for you. And look at me now.
Yeah. The thing is that idea of a business is actually such a rare attitude to have. It's very rare that I encounter people, and that I think most people encounter people in the theater world who think about what they're doing as a business. But we get caught up in the art of it and things like that. But and that's what often keeps people away from producing, from creating their own work, from really developing that aspect, is the idea that what you're doing is a business. And so because it's a business, you have to figure out how you're going to make money.
Yeah, well, and I mean, to me, theater is like, yes, it's business, but it's also community, right? And I think a lot about how with that business, because the thing is, I take my job very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I am worth, and my stories and every single thing I do is worth my time. Hence, I should be paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
And because of it, like that, this is my business. This is how I pay my bills. And it has always been my intention, even being an immigrant to this country where the government is not set up for artists to succeed, especially immigrant artists. So I think that I find that really interesting when, like at least on my legal journey in this country, where I haven't been able to really, like, to fully develop my artistry because of those legalities. But at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I do make money from my work, and I should be making money from my work. So how can I do that? But not only how can I do that for me, but also how can I do that for the people working around me, working with me, collaborating with me, because we are all worthy of that. And it is important to me in the way that I work that is acknowledged first and foremost. But also I think about the impact. I mean, theater is, like, I think is the love of my life. And I just think I have so much love and respect for it. And I also think a lot about the impact of theater, not only, to my life, but also to others. And how do we use this vehicle for storytelling and building relationships and community that is also so ingrained in what I do.
One thing that sort of I'm leading away from what you were saying about how, because of the fact that you're an immigrant to this country, that you haven't really been able to use some of the resources of grants and things like that. I'm curious, as somebody who has looked at what they're doing as a business, but hasn't been able to sort of like lean on the granting system. Do you, and this is like this, I don't know, might be controversial. Do you think that as Canadian artists, we rely too much on the grants?
Oof. That is a good question. I mean, yes, I think that there is, if I'm being completely honest, I think that without those grants, a lot of artists wouldn't be able to, to perhaps try and grow and learn from this thing that we call theater making. So indeed, I think that is definitely a positive thing. Now, let me tell you something. When I was in Mexico, because of the lack of the support from the government, theater was not seen as something professional, like at least here. And now this is my perspective when I was 18, like years ago. So at the time, I never actually considered theater being a career because of that, because there were not a lot of support by the government here. I am always amazed by how much support the government
Mm.
gives to artists, and I think that that is something outstanding. Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, we may be relying a lot on those grants, but without that support, we wouldn't be able to thrive,
Mm.
to grow, to fail,
Mhm.
to learn. So I think that that is something really great about the granting system. Now, of course, for me personally, as an immigrant who for the longest time did not have access to any of the funding opportunities available, it was tricky because
Mm.
then I had to convince a larger organization or an institution that I was worthy. I had to convince them that my stories were interesting or that they would sell.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
mean, actually, luckily, I never got to that point of like talking about, like my show will sell, so that's why you should get me. But like I think that there was something about the lack of agency in me saying, this is the show that I want to do because I want to, and
Mhm.
not because I feel like I am fitting in someone else's mandate.
Mhm.
Um, so now I have managed to build a career even with those limitations, because again, I'm very passionate about this, and I guess with my own learning of like how to navigate the system, I have also been able to support others around me
Mhm.
that are also, maybe considering theater as an option for a career.
Hmm. Yeah. One of the other things that you mentioned right before we started talking about that is the idea of how you came up with your own method for acting in a language that you was not native to you.
Hmm.
Um, how did you develop that, and what did that look like?
Have you ever heard of this fella named Shakespeare?
Yes, yes, yeah, I've heard of them.
Well, when I moved, and one of the reasons why I also moved to an English speaking country was because I knew that going into whatever acting career I wanted to pursue, Shakespeare was going to come up. And at the time, I thought that, like Shakespeare, well, as I said, my English or my understanding of the English language was pretty decent. So I thought to myself, well, we will obviously going to talk about the Greek theater. I don't speak Greek, but I do speak English. So what if I actually study how, Shakespeare is supposed to be performed in its original language?
Hmm.
So that was one of the catalysts as well for me to find an English speaking country to study. Um, Now, when I moved here, I wasn't taught how to perform Shakespeare, even though they were asking me to present Shakespeare
Hmm.
monologues. At school, they didn't teach me until I was in my third year of university.
Ooh.
So it was kind of late in the game, right? But I was still very eager and still very intimidated when I got to my third year of
Mhm.
university and had to deal with Shakespeare. And what was so amazing to me was that I remember when we were in our third year, Jeanette Lamberborn-Maury was my Shakespeare teacher. Who, I mean, who else than Jeanette Lamberborn-Maury to teach you how to perform Shakespeare?
Mhm.
So she was the one who taught me, and I remember, when we were talking about the process and like tackling like heightened language and all of these like methods that we learned, I realized that my process was very similar to what the thing that I was already doing with
Hmm.
the other monologues that I was performing, even like whatever thing I was performing in English. So I realized, I was like, oh my God, like this is exactly the same thing that I already do. And I remember my classmates saying, oh my God, this is a lot of work. This is so hard. And I literally remember turning to them and saying, yeah, welcome to my world. This is what I do. And the thing was that Shakespeare, and the reason why I love Shakespeare, I also have some issues with Shakespeare, but I do love Shakespeare because it's the only time for me as an English as a second language performer, I feel like I am playing on even ground with
Hmm.
fellow performers
Hmm.
whose tongue is English, because we all have to go through the same process. This is basically our extra language. It would be my third language for me, might be a second language for someone else. So I remember like the joy of being finally in a place where we were all on the same boat, in terms of language, obviously. And that was very exciting. So without knowing, I had already developed a system that then was reinforced to me through Shakespeare. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awfully familiar.
It's fascinating because anytime that I've performed Shakespeare, and it is you mentioning this sort of reminds me of the fact that when we're doing Shakespeare, the first thing we do is we spend a day or more going through the script, making sure we all understand what the words mean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only in really Shakespeare. I mean, other classical texts as well that will do that. But for the most part, since Shakespeare is ubiquitous and probably one of the most, at least in Canada and in England, one of the more common classical texts, is we all sit down and we have to figure out, do we all agree on what these words mean? And that, again, is sort of a thing that you were doing. And it's necessary to figure out, so that we all understand, so that our audience can understand, because the audience is essentially having to be attuned to language that they don't necessarily understand as well.
Exactly. But the thing is, Phil, that I think that should apply to everything. And I mean, what a gift I received coming here, because sure, when I was back in Mexico, I was not doing this, like I was not looking up the Spanish words. I mean, the words that I didn't know what they meant or what they, how to pronounce them or whatever. Yeah, I did that process, but really engaging in that rich way with the language is something that I took for granted when I was performing in Spanish. And I have come to realize the importance. And now that I'm a playwright as well, like I spend significant amount of time figuring out the language of my pieces, especially because I also do a lot of like English and Spanish scripts. So that, I think that there is a lot of value in the way that, these words have been arranged on a piece of paper. And in my directing, for me as a director, the first thing is for me to understand the text as though I was going to perform it, because it is important to me to make sure that the actor that I'm working with is also understanding of the text, even though that might be their first language. I think that it's so important for us to have that clarity.
I mean, English can be somebody's first language, but there are words that not everybody knows. There are contexts that not everybody knows. There's so much work that can be done and should be done on a script. Just because it's in the colloquial or modern English doesn't mean that we shouldn't investigate it in much the same way.
Yeah, well, and the same thing happens with, like inside jokes and references. Like I didn't get a lot of them. I still don't. So that's why I have to do that research that I think, and maybe this is a hot take, but I think I am a very good actor because my job is to make you feel like these words that I'm about to say are coming from my heart when I wasn't born speaking this language. So if you believe my emotional journey while I speak these English words, I think I have done a really, really good job.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned being a writer, and I'm curious, as a writer myself, I'm always curious about people's writing journeys. Was writing something that you did when you were a child, or is it something that's new to you?
It's relatively new. I mean, I can also say, I have been writing since I was a child. I mean, sure, I was writing like whatever. When I was in high school, in junior high, I wrote a play, a Christmas pageant. So, like I did that, but I did that because I felt like I was tired of the Santa Claus play. I was tired of the Nativity play. So I was like, okay, no, let's spice it up this time around. So anyway, I wrote a play that it was really fun for me to write and also be in it. But yeah, like recently I have embraced playwriting now for different reasons. And one being, I think that to me, playwriting is an act of rebellion. And it has been an act of rebellion because for the longest time, I never saw myself on stage. I never saw my communities on stage. The stories that we were telling or that my friends and I were telling were not reflected on local stages. And I thought that that was a big, big, huge gap. And the thing was, like, I mean, personally, as a performer trying to make it in the, in the theater scene, I was always being cast in these like background roles and, like these
Mm-hmm.
supporting roles that
Mm-hmm.
are clearly just serving the white narrative. And I got tired of it. I got really disappointed by it because I could tell that and I mean, I guess I'm not being objective here, but I thought that I had something to offer, that I was able to perform the boots down of a text. Like, I really thought that I could do that work,
Mm.
but I was never given that opportunity. So I began writing my own material, just clearly showing what I was able to do. And I think that part of like my how I can measure that success is when people say, people had said to me, "Wow, I didn't know you could do that." It's like, well, because I was never given the chance. So I guess that proves my point.
It's so. I mean, I think that's been a problem that Canadian and English theater has been contending with or facing, and only recently has started to address. Kudos to the Stratford Festival in the past year for really buckling down and examining the bias that it's had with people who are on stage. But oftentimes in the theaters and in the schools, often the teachers are white, and they carry biases, and they carry their own blinders, and often with people who are people of color, if they're Black, if they're Indigenous, if they are not white, they often have a quote unquote a difficult time figuring out what to do with them. Instead of like, I get so frustrated when people are like, "Oh, we're going to cast all the white people as this. We're going to do this." Like, "Oh, we can't cast these people together because they don't look like a family." Well, what does a family look like? In theater, people suspend quote unquote disbelief more than they do in a film. Theater is our opportunity to put exactly what we see on the streets, all the multicultural, all the multicolored, everything on the stage, and have people just accept it. I always get frustrated when people get stuck, quote unquote, stuck on this binary.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. Where I feel like for the longest time, people were seeing me in the surface, like the things that they could see. So my brown skin, my curly hair, perhaps my accent, like all of these things that I was like, well, but you're not seeing beyond me. And not to say that those things aren't relevant to me, because of course that experience, me holding onto this body that drives me around the world, that has shaped my experience and has shaped my way of thinking. But like, sometimes I am a person, I am a sibling, I am a partner, all of these things that go beyond race, language, culture. Like, I think that at the core, like we're talking about human values, and I think that goes beyond anything else. And the thing about representation, I mean, to me, it is so important in the work that I do. And I guess obviously I started writing a lot of like Mexican stories not even Mexican stories. They're characters from Mexico in Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, talk about being specific. But I think that I wrote those stories because that was like my lived experience, and I thought to myself, I am a part of this community, and my community are not seeing me. And if they don't see me, can they see someone else? And in the work that I do, I try to do that as much as possible, to share those opportunities and to say, okay, yes, here I am, but here is also this person and that person. So it's not only about me.
One of the things I think about representation and how important it is when we don't have diverse representation on our stages, we are essentially telling our audience that what is on the stage is what we are and who we welcome.
Yeah.
And it essentially shuts off anybody who does not match what we're putting on the stage. We can tell them, sure, come and see this, but we're not really producing this for you. And it's such a closed minded, just it's so small for the theater world. And it's so much more interesting to bring the world that's actually on the street onto the stage and share that and bring all of the experiences and all of the people together.
Yeah, and I think like something that I also want to say about that is that just because, like say we are seeing a diverse or a racialized experience on stage, that doesn't mean that it is only for those people. I feel like that happens a lot with my work. I find that people say, like I'm always saying like, oh, this play is about a queer young Mexican man. So people assume that the play is for only Mexicans or only for queer people. And people have said that like openly to me, where they are like, why should I consume your queer content? And I'm like, why should I consume the straight content then? That I am forced to consume. So I think that yes, absolutely, it's this thing about representation and how important it is to say you have a space here. But also the thing that I would ask back is to the audiences and say, but are you also making space for these stories that are not only yours? Because I feel like that's also lacking.
Yes. Absolutely. It's kind of, we saw this sort of thing recently with some people's reactions to the Pixar film Turning Red. Like,
oh my God. Yeah.
So many people were like, well, I can't see myself in this story of a young Chinese girl. And it's such a beautiful story that if people would just sort of sit and watch it without, I don't know, being stupid. There's so much they would get out of it.
If I can relate to Cinderella, they can relate to Turning Red.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's good storytelling and good story and good character is good storytelling and good character, regardless of skin color, language, everything else.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And that was the thing that I feel like I have been forced, and it's not a choice, Phil. I have been forced to take in all of these, and I say that in quotation marks, the this right? The norm. This is what a family looks like. This is what the love interest looks like. This is, so I have been forced to embrace it and accept it. Why can't we just open up our understanding of what does that mean? What does that look like? And we focus on the core value. And that's the thing that I have always been attracted to, is like, okay, this story is about love. This story is about, motherhood. This story is about friendship. Because at the end of the day, that's what I care about. Yes, of course, I see it. I see the story from the perspective of who tells it, and probably, like their lived experience will shape the way that the storytelling unfolds. But let's look at the core value, because spoiler alert, we are all human beings.
Spoilers, indeed. I wanted to ask you about Alter. It's just looking at your website, it looks like you're working on Alter in 2019, which is like the year before. It's like all the hopes and dreams that we had for what was going to happen, for what was going to start in 2019 and carry over into 2020. So you started the workshop of it in 2019. Tell me about the creation of the play and what is it about?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Altar holds a very, very special place in my heart because I think that play really changed the path of my career in so many directions, because that was my first time writing a play. That was my first time doing a one-person show. So that took a lot of me. And it was, I mean, I wrote this play because of this thing that I was telling you, where I felt like I was not seeing myself represented on stage. So I wanted to write a story about something that was close to my heart that I could be able to perform. And I actually, like, I made the choice to make this a one-person show because I said this is an opportunity for people to just focus on me, perhaps very selfishly, but I was so desperate and so frustrated back then in 2019 at people not being able to see me, beyond all of the things from the outside. So I wrote this play. I began writing it when I was in the UK. I was in, as part of my studies, I had to go there to Harlow and do a term there. And I began writing it because there was a deadline for a festival that I wanted to be a part of. Going back to spoilers, I didn't make it into that festival, but that's okay. So I wrote this play. It was a very, a rough draft. I was there with my class, the class of 2019, and I had my friend Robin Huxer, who, I thought, I was like, oh, she's very good at dramaturgy. And I mean, of course, at the time we were all very young and we were trying everything. And I said to her, well, I don't have much to offer, but would you mind, like, dramaturging my piece? And, in the beginning, it was just like very like small. Then the play got into another festival, the St. John's Short Play Festival in 2019. And but the big thing about that was that about writing that play in the UK was that I actually was ghosted by my boyfriend at the time. Now, when I wrote this play, Altar, I wrote it simply coming from the perspective of my curiosity at the time was to say, what would happen if I ever get to see all of the people that have ghosted me, all of the dates that I have, that have ghosted me? What would that experience be like? And originally, my intention was to have the ghosts talk about me, as opposed to me engaging with them. So that curiosity came from that place. And then the thing about the altar, I was like, at the time, also like Coco, speaking about these Pixar movies, Coco had just come out and I loved it. And I thought, well, there is already like a knowledge of Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead, because of this movie. So what if I just lean a little bit on it because, that's part of my culture. So I thought on connecting something that was like personal to my experience and my culture with this curiosity that I had, which was, this notion of being ghosted. And I thought to myself, well, what if I do write a play about that? Anyway, so that's how that play came to be. But at the same time, when I was in the UK, my boyfriend was ghosting me at the same time, but I didn't know it. It wasn't until I came back to Canada that I was like, did I just write? Yeah, that's my life. So that was such a hard, because then obviously when I got here, my boyfriend at the time was gone, and then I had to finish this play. So it was a very, like a difficult process, just like trying to deal with that. I mean, I took a lot of care to for myself and my process to really just like focus on the story without it being too personal, in a way that it would be harmful. And then at the time, I was really good friends with Megan Greeley. We had just finished doing a show, a tour across the province, and then I told her about my experience, and yeah, she was very intrigued. So then I went to Montreal to visit her after our tour, and I went there to finish my second draft of this play. And then I thought to myself, well, like, she would be perfect to dramaturge with her experience as a playwright. And I also thought to myself, well, she should also direct it. As I said, like, part of like my journey in the community and in my practice has always been to make space for other people, even, in my projects. So I thought that she would be a perfect director, but she just needed an opportunity. So that's why she for that reason and more, like, she's just like very gifted artist. I invited her to direct it, and she continued with the dramaturgy then. And then we presented the show, and it was, I mean, Phil, I thought I was going to get a GG. I was like, oh my God, where was all of this? Like, this play is the play that everyone was looking for. Why did I kept it from all of you, my fans? Now, did I mention that that was the very first play that I wrote? Um, so probably it was not that great. And actually, it was not great. It was good in terms of like, it gave me some sense of direction. But of course, I think what happened after that was that I reached out to the Resource Centre for the Arts Theatre Company and told them, hey, would you like to produce my play? And they were like, let's talk about it.
Hmm.
So we had a really good conversation about the possibilities. One of the things that have always been really important to me about this play is this, like the impact of representation. I think that my work again focuses on really opening space for the concept of what a Newfoundland and Labrador, piece, theater, or play, script looks like. And to me, I was thinking, well, this is a very Newfoundland and Labrador play. I mean, it's set in St. John's. What else do you want? It obviously it is interwoven with my Mexican culture, but that doesn't mean that it's only Mexican. So part of that thing that I wanted to do was to actually take it to schools, to high schools, because I believe that youth are. I mean, I say it as though I am, like a fossil, but youth is really shaping the future today. And if we are talking about these things, about queerness, about race, now, I think that our future would look brighter. Climate change, all of these things that are so important. And then that was something that the Resource Center for the Arts was really interested in touring it to schools. So then they decided to engage me in the development of like a longer piece aimed to schools, to high schools. But that was back in 2020. I was actually in Toronto. I was teaching at Georgetown Theatre School with Jeanette, actually. And I was at the gym at the Y. I was working out. I was having a meeting, about like next steps with the Resource Center for the Arts. It was so exciting. And then, who came around the corner. And we were supposed to actually premiere the show in 2020.
Right.
So it was just like very disheartening because we were like, oh my God, okay. So 2020 didn't happen. But the great thing was that the Resource Center for the Arts said, well, maybe we can continue developing the script because that needs to happen anyway. And I was like, great. So we had like a week-long workshop in the fall. And that was my first time, like, I think like a year in between from me from like performing it to reading that draft again. And that's when I found out that the play was not as great as I thought it was. It was, like a year of me like learning more about playwriting. I was dabbing more into dramaturgy as well. So I was like, okay. So I found a lot of loopholes, a lot of things, like also like poor writing, period. That I think that the play took a leap forward. And then in the spring of 2020, we were going to do the show and then the tour. And we had another wave of COVID. So we had to cancel. And we decided at the time, we said, well, maybe let's just wait for 2022 this year. But luckily, we were looking at doing a production of this show in the fall of 2021, which felt unreal. And at the time I said, well, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. But what we decided was to stagger the main stage production and the tour, just because we were really trying to move this project forward. And so we got to do, and it was actually a really fun coincidence that we got to do the show during Dia de Muertos. It lined up perfectly with the dates of around the dates of Day of the Dead. So we got to, it was an opportunity for me not to only bring this play that was like personal to me, but also my culture to the theater. And it was so special to me to see the LSPU hall welcoming and creating this community altar. I was like, wow. So it's not only like a play, it's also like this experience of people like trying to be a part and welcoming welcoming them into my culture as well, which was very, very rich. So like that was, the fall of 2021. It was a great run. I learned a lot, like from that workshop that I had in the fall of 2021. When I got into rehearsals, I remember like walking around the rehearsal hall with my scripts in hand, and I would just stop and say to Megan, this makes no sense. I need to rewrite this. And Megan was like, I was trying to direct you. No, don't do that. But she was very understanding, being a playwright herself. Like she was like, oh my God, yes. So that happened. That was the fall. And now obviously we're getting closer to the spring of 2022. And as you probably know, this girl called Omicron happened in December.
Mm-hmm.
So then our in-person tour for this spring got pivoted.
Mm-hmm.
Did you imagine that in 2022 we would still be pivoting?
No, because when this whole thing started, back in March of 2020, and I've thought about this a lot, I thought 2 weeks, we've got this thing beat. And 2 years later, we're still,
Yeah, no, we're still pivoting. But, I think that what happened was that I was like thinking, I think it's important to take this story out. One of the things and the reasons why I wanted to tour it in person, and it was so important, for us to actually delay it twice, it was because I thought that especially youth have access to a myriad of things online, where, of course, we get to see a little bit more diversity, especially in the past couple of years, on Netflix and HBO and Hulu and whatever. But when it comes to stories about our community, we don't have access to that in the same way. So I really wanted to be in the room with these students and say, hey, look, there is a queer brown person in your classroom, and he actually lives in Newfoundland and Labrador. This story actually happened here. That was so important to me. Now, obviously, in a digital version of the show, it's not entirely the same, even though we will still be doing like outreach and engagement with the students in a digital way, because that to me is important. So for this iteration of the play, we turned really into film, into what are our devices. I think that Megan did a beautiful job. So Megan also directed the film version with a mentorship by Ruth Lawrence, who's also an amazing theater person and film person. And so basically what Megan did so beautifully, in my opinion, was to really turn those theatrical devices that worked for theater into a film version of them that were completely different to what people saw on stage, but now they worked for this play. So really what people will see, like this version of Altar, is actually very different from what people saw on stage. And that is exciting to me, because then this play will serve in a very different way. And the experience of people, seeing this for the first time will be unique. And I think that's very important to me.
That's great. I think there's potential in digital productions. I also, I feel like sometimes people think I shouldn't do it digital because then people will already have seen it. And I think about all the times that I've gone to see my favorite band play the songs that I already know and have. And I think that if we would stop thinking about digital as an impediment to live performance, but maybe an augment, that people will still go see people love to see their favorite comedian do the bits they already know. People like to see the bands play the songs they know. So I feel like digital is a way of opening up our world theatrically.
Totally. It's this thing about impact, which I find really exciting, because, perhaps in person I could have done 10 runs of this show, but now with a digital option, I can actually do, people can see it more. And I can also reach to people in Labrador that I have never been to Labrador. Right. And I mean, part of this tour was to go to Labrador, but at least I can make sure that, the weather won't be a problem, because then the students will have access to this story. And yeah, so I agree with you.
That's great. Well, Santiago, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Thank you very much for inviting me and just, talk a little bit.